Welcome to episode 18 of the Carnism Debunked podcast. It's been a while since I've sat down to record a podcast with a guest, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion, where I'm joined by David Arenas. David is an animal rights activist based in Colombia, and you can catch his insightful posts about veganism from a rights-based perspective on Instagram at davidc.arenas. I'll leave a link in the description. Anyway, it's always good to hear his opinions on stuff, and I definitely think you'll learn some interesting perspectives, whoever you are listening to the show today. So, David, good to catch up with you, man, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, no worries, man. So, we couldn't do this show without talking about the CosmicSkeptic stuff that's happened recently. So, what were your thoughts on CosmicSkeptic saying that he's no longer vegan, and could you see any red flags in leading up to the fact that he's now an ex-vegan? I mean, for anyone listening, I just for those of you who might not be aware of who CosmicSkeptic is, he's a very well-known YouTuber, like in the philosophy sphere. He's an atheist. He's supposedly like a critical thinker, and he sent waves, a few years back when he said, through the community, when he said he was going vegan, and he was a great asset to the team, or so we thought anyway. And now he's just released this statement saying he's been eating animals for however many long, and veganism failed him and whatever. So, David, what were the sort of red flags you saw there with Alex O'Connor, his name is, leading up to that?
Yeah, well, as soon as I see anyone define veganism as a reduction of suffering, that's a red flag for me.
Oh, okay.
It's obvious that they don't understand what the term means and what the concept entails.
Yeah, that's definitely a strong position that you have there, because many vegans say I'm vegan in order to reduce the amount of suffering in the world. What is it that you see wrong with that position then, when you say that isn't about what veganism means? Describe to me your thoughts on that. What's the deal with that?
Well, it's as if feminists would say, well, I'm feminist because I want to reduce the suffering of women anywhere. And that's not the point of being a feminist. The point of being a feminist is to elevate the status of women in society.
Yeah.
So it's the same with the animal cause.
Was there anything else that Alex had said leading up to it that you saw as a red flag and how sure were you that he was not going to be vegan one day? How sure were you that he was going to become an ex-vegan?
No, I wasn't sure, but it wasn't surprising. I wasn't sure that it was going to happen, but when it happened, it was like, okay, well,
yeah,
another utilitarian,
Describe what utilitarianism is, because a lot of people listening to the show might not be familiar with philosophy terms. And there's things like there's deontology, there's utilitarianism. Would you say that you're a deontologist and that veganism is deontological?
I wouldn't classify myself as anyone, as anything within the realm of moral ethics, because I think it depends on the situation.
Sure.
If I think that a law is stupid, I won't follow it. I won't follow that law.
So what is a utilitarian, and why do you see utilitarianism as a problem for veganism?
Yeah, utilitarianism is an ethical theory that states that we should strive to maximize utility, and utility in this case is pleasure, and minimize pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And it sounds logical, but it comes with a lot of impossibilities, or where they go around they pass from moral obligations to moral virtues.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. That's a problem that I see. That's a huge problem for the animal cause.
And What's a moral obligation and what
Well,
is a moral virtue? Can you describe the difference between those two things?
Yeah, in the context of animal rights, the moral obligation would be not to violate animal rights. And moral virtue would be, for example, to have a sanctuary, to help animals in the wild, and to intervene, to avoid suffering in the wild. And so, that's outside the realm of veganism, if you understand what veganism means.
So an obligation is just something that you should just generally do, something that you should do. Like, it's not something necessarily good to do it. It's just something that as a default we should just do. And then a moral virtue would be something like you're sort of taking that extra step to do something good. Is that how you would describe sort of the difference between those two things?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. And what had you seen in, just going back to Alex, what had you seen in his like speech or like the way he was about animal rights? What had you seen that maybe made you suggested that he was seeing veganism as some kind of moral virtue rather than an obligation?
Yeah, he said several times that he didn't believe in animal rights,
right,
or even human rights.
Okay.
Yeah. So and to me, that's completely off. Like completely opposite to veganism.
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? If I mean, if he said he didn't even believe in the concept of human rights, would you infer from that that he might go on and like murder a human or like commit some kind of human rights violation, or would you be confident that he wouldn't do that?
No, but that's the problem with utilitarianism. That when if push comes to shove, then they would agree with rights violations. So
okay,
and we don't know where to draw the line.
And the problem here is, I guess, with you mentioned that a utilitarian would be happy with rights violations. Now, ultimately, the reason for that is because they see that the rights violation might cause a greater good in some way. So utilitarians are just focused on outcomes, right? What's wrong with that though? So like, what would be wrong with violating a right as long as the good that you got from violating that right was great? Let's say it like massively reduced animal suffering to violate a right somehow. What would be technically wrong with that? I mean, there might be no concrete or objective answer to this. I'm just wondering what your opinion would be on why that would be wrong.
Well, the idea of having rights is to protect your interests. So if you don't have rights, if your rights depend on the well-being of others, then we would live in a very dangerous society, because it depends on who thinks they are, or their interests are more important than the interests of other individuals.
Yeah.
So, for example, Peter Singer, who was the CosmicSkeptic mentor,
yes,
he says that he's okay with vivisection,
right? Because and who is he okay on performing vivisection for? Is he okay as long as it cures human diseases, or is he talking about testing on animals to save other non-human animals?
I think he's okay with vivisection to help humans, because he thinks that humans have greater moral value.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I can see where the problem is coming from now with the utilitarian stuff. Because ultimately it could lead you to, saying, vivisection is okay. It's okay to torture and abuse this animal if we manage to cure X many humans of this disease, right? And I guess as activists, it's very important that we focus on just protecting the interests of animals, because in my opinion, I don't think that anyone should have to be tortured and abused just to save someone else. Whereas a strict utilitarian might say that you know, there might be a certain threshold, but they might ultimately say that if you were to save a significant amount of people by torturing this one animal, whatever, in a lab, then that would be okay. And like you, that's certainly not a position I hold either, I guess.
No. Yeah, I don't think it's right to take away the rights of other individual. So yeah.
Is there a possibility though, David, that we could become dogmatic in this? We could start saying, you know, does it get too far? Is there a point where we say, okay, well, this would actually be stupid to not test on this animal or not kill this animal or whatever it might be in order to save X million animals or X million humans or whatever it is? Like, is there a point where it can become stupid? Or do you think that it's always right to be deontological and outcomes just do not matter so long as a right is being violated?
Yeah, no, I think we can be, people can be dogmatic if, for example, if we think of the rights of insects, and so we shouldn't jog in the park or stuff like that. I think it's just stupid. It becomes impracticable. But as far as vivisection, I wouldn't support it. I don't think an innocent individual has to pay the price for humans.
What about, I mean, I'm going to press you here a little bit. Now, what about if testing on that one animal and that animal would go through a bit of torture and abuse, whatever, what if that would potentially save billions of non-human animals? Would it be okay to test on that one animal to save those billions of animals?
I don't think that we should base these decisions on these calculations.
Yeah,
but
so number doesn't matter to you. It's just the fact that the right is being violated, and to what extent. Well, tell me, what do you think we should base it on? If we can't base it on that, what do you think we should base it on?
Well, as animal rights activists, we are not legislators. We are not the ones making the decisions.
Yeah,
but we should have a clear message that animal rights are inviolable. That we have not the right. We are not entitled to violate animal rights for our own benefit. And that's what the vegan stance is all about.
So how did you come to veganism personally, and like did you come into it from this perspective that you had now, or did you used to have a different perspective?
I was a vegetarian. I saw some slaughterhouse videos, some slaughterhouse footage, and I became a vegetarian because I didn't even know that there was such thing as veganism.
Yeah.
So I became a vegetarian, and then I was watching more videos, and like YouTube suggestions were about animal stuff, and I saw this video of a little hen getting her beak cut off.
Yeah.
And I saw the suffering and the pain, and I was like, well, this is really bad. So I stopped consuming anything that was animal suffering related. So I was a welfarist. That's at that point. Yeah.
So what made you change from a welfarist into someone who was rights-based?
Yeah, I just kept researching, and I got to the point where I had to read the history of the movement, of the vegan movement.
Right.
And these guys like Watson and Leslie Cross, and especially Leslie Cross, was for me, it was the most important figure in the vegan movement, because he really put together all the philosophy behind it.
That's interesting. Right. Okay. So, because when we think of the formation of the vegan society, we often think of Donald Watson. Tell us about Leslie Cross. Who was Leslie Cross, and why do you find him such a significant figure within veganism?
Yeah, Leslie Cross was Watson's personal friend, and he was the vice president of the Vegan Society as Watson was the president.
Yep.
And he was the one who really defined veganism for the first time, because as we know, well, Donald Watson, coined the term with with his wife, Dorothy.
Dorothy. Yep.
And they coined the term, but they didn't really define it as such. They were unsure how to define the term. They had some parameters, that they had some guidelines that, well, obviously a vegan doesn't consume anything that comes from an animal.
Yeah.
But they didn't know how to define that motivation behind. So they spent like 7 years. It was like ongoing talks, Watson and Cross and all other vegans. And Leslie Cross put together a paper. It's called Veganism Defined. It's from 1951. And he talks about the whole philosophy behind it, that it's about ending animal exploitation.
Yes.
That it was a doctrine, the doctrine that humans should live without exploiting animals.
Yeah.
And that it came from a recognition that animals are sentient individuals, and we should respect their rights.
Because I just want to make this clear, right? Veganism has always existed throughout history. I mean, you've got things that way predate the vegan society, right? You've got like Al-Ma'ari in what is now modern day Syria, like over 1,000 years ago, writing the poem "I No Longer Steal from Nature." But the vegan society was, as we know it, the world's first ever group committed to actual veganism and not being a welfarist group. And you're saying Leslie Cross was the significant figure in that, not Watson, who really codified what animal rights was, and it not being about welfare and stuff, and just the idea that animals shouldn't be used as resources for humans.
Exactly. There were people behind, before veganism, that maybe had the same idea about animals and about the exploitation of nature, or sentient individuals in nature.
Okay, and what are some? Go on, finish what you're about to say.
Yeah, but Leslie Cross defined the whole thing. They put it a name. They put a name to it. There's a label now for the movement. There's a label for this philosophy, for this mindset, or for this principle, because it's important to know that they defined it as a principle. And it has become distorted over the years. Now that the vegan society, the current vegan society, is not aligned with that definition anymore. So
that's interesting. Okay. Well, let's get into that. What are you finding about the vegan society in the modern day that you're saying is a violation of the initial intentions of the vegan society, which was established in the 1940s?
Yeah, so as I said, they defined it as a principle, and it was important because it's like plant-based people are not vegan just because they stopped consuming animal products. They are vegan once they understand that they have no right to exploit other sentient individuals from other species. And it was very important that they spent 7 years to get to that point. And in 1964, they already changed it when Watson and Cross were no longer the president and vice president of the society. They changed the definition to to a way of life. That was the first time that they started talking about a way of life, so a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And if we downgrade the term from principle to a lifestyle, it's, you know, we are watering down the concept.
Well, what do you find wrong? What do you find wrong with the term way of life? Like, what's wrong with saying that?
Well, it gives the impression that you can choose your lifestyle. It's no longer a moral obligation. It's not an ethical principle.
Right.
It's not an ethical principle. You can choose your lifestyle, and nobody can tell you. Because it's like, well, you can choose to be a very sporty person, a very active person, or you can choose to be a couch potato.
I get what you mean, because if we applied it in the human context, it would sound wishy-washy, wouldn't it? Oh yes, it's a way of life that I choose not to murder other people. You know, it's my lifestyle. Hey, respect my lifestyle, not that I don't murder other people. Well, hold on, is it a lifestyle or is it just a moral obligation to leave others alone, right? And I guess this is what we need to apply to animal rights as well. Are there any other problems? Yeah, and are there any other problems that you're seeing with the vegan society in this day and age, or is that kind of the main thing that you're seeing?
Yeah, then in 1979 they changed that definition, and they added the as far as practicable and possible.
That wasn't in the 1940s definition then, no?
No.
That's interesting. Okay, so carry on about this. So in the 70s, they say as far as is practicable and possible. And what were you going to say was wrong with that?
That no other movement has such a clause, an explanation, an additional explanation to what extent should the movement go.
But let's think about this, right? If we don't have that in there, that clause in there about the as far as is practicable and possible, can't carnists just catch us out and sort of, if we don't have that in there, can carnists not just say, oh, well, you, David, are using a laptop and that has like little micro parts of gelatin in it or something? Like, does it not work to our benefit that we have that little thing in there? Because it is practically unavoidable to go through life without any kind of animal products or anything like that. Like, they're in the walls of our house. They're like there's animal parts, like micro parts in our devices and stuff like that. So why would you see that as a problem that they introduced this in the 70s?
Yeah, we could say the same about human rights, because if a person supports animal rights or does any kind of activism for human rights, then there would be people telling him or her that they are using a computer, and maybe some of the minerals found in the computer were obtained by enslaving children in Africa or whatever. So we can say the same about human rights, but we don't. So it's a double standard with the animal cause that we always have to deal with, and it's a distraction. It serves as a distraction. All the critiques to veganism start by trying to get to that point where it's impossible to do it, and no other cause asks for the impossible or impracticable. So it's redundant. It's something that shouldn't be there.
So what
it just
do you
gives
say?
people it just gives people more of an excuse not to be vegan.
Does it not actually give people more of a, does it not actually help people be vegan? Because maybe if we didn't have that little bit in there, people might just think, well, it's impossible to live without some form of like animal product somewhere in this current climate. So there's no point in being vegan. Because I can kind of see it working in our favor and getting vegans on board. Because if we have that in there, you know, you can actually say to people, well, no, look, hold on. We're just saying as far as is practicable and possible. I'm not going to say to you, if you need a taxi home at night, don't get in a taxi that has a leather seat or something like that. So surely, if anything, it helps our cause, no?
No, I don't think so. I think, for example, CosmicSkeptic was, I think he was in Paris.
Yeah.
And he was using that as far as practicable and possible bit, just to say, well, I'm in Paris and I cannot find anything vegan at the moment. Maybe I should consume some.
Yeah, I can see people like him,
whatever.
abusing that clause, so to speak. People can people can take the piss, right? They can use that to say like whatever they, you know, quote unquote, for anyone who, obviously this is an audio recorded podcast, but I'm doing the little speech marks in the air right now when I say, you know, practicable and possible. Someone could say that, like Alex, for example, and just say, well, you know, and therefore I ate a steak when out in Paris because, you know, there wasn't a vegan restaurant. I mean, his excuse was nonsense anyway, because he spoke to Joey Carbstrong and said something about that. And then Joey Carbstrong happy cowed like a load of vegan eateries all around him, wherever it was in France. So, I see what you're saying, but ultimately, I think that's just a case of people abusing that clause. I'm still not convinced it's specifically a problem with that clause.
Yeah, no, whenever you weaken an ethical principle, because it's an ethical principle, it's not a way of life. That's something that also Leslie Cross tried to clarify and make people understand that this is not, veganism is not a set of practices. He said, veganism is not a set of practices. It's an ethical principle. The practices that comes with the ethical principle are just, well, a logical consequence. But we shouldn't get hanged on talking about the practices, because it's an unending, it's an unending discussion about which practices, but it just goes to it's very clear that these practices are a problem, that whenever anti-vegans debate vegans, they focus on which practices are vegan, which practices are not vegan, and it shouldn't be that it shouldn't be that difficult to understand. It's that we oppose the exploitation of animals, and we have to live in societies and civilizations, and we have to engage in some activities that maybe harm animals, but we are not exploiting them directly, and it should just be something really simple.
Now, obviously I see that you are a fan of what Leslie Cross contributed to the movement. Do you see any were there any problems with Donald Watson specifically that you had? Like, so you're a fan of Cross. What about Watson? Yeah. Was there any was there any critique that you have of him specifically? Do you think he needed Leslie Cross in order to make this movement what it is?
Yeah, I think so. Watson was still too focused on just food production,
right?
And he talked about spirituality and stuff like that, maybe way too much.
Right.
Because I understand that the point was that if humanity progress progresses, morally, if humanity achieves a moral progress, then it would benefit other areas of the human existence.
Yeah.
So we would be kinder to each other and all that stuff. But it wasn't the focus of the movement. And some
Right.
people take advantage of it, and then you have intersectionals saying that, but Watson said that humans will also benefit from veganism, so human causes should be included. And
Right.
that's not the point. That was not the point, but he was kind of leaning towards talking about that too much,
So
instead of.
when intersectionals say that veganism is intersectional and that the founders of the vegan society intended for veganism to be intersectional, that means like a political human rights movement as much as it is for animals, and a leftist movement at that. How do you respond to that when they say that?
Yeah, precisely. Leslie Cross in 1949 wrote something along the lines of, there is no evidence that veganism focuses on anything different than the relationship between humans and other animals.
Right.
Something along those lines.
Do you
And
think that Watson was an intersectional, at least in a 1940s sense?
not at all. No, he just was like any of us. We are worried about the environment. We are worried about other stuff that happens to humans, but we are not going to take advantage of of veganism and use it as a platform to push for other movements.
Now
That's
you mentioned the environment there. Now, in my opinion, while veganism benefits the environment, veganism actually has nothing to do with the environment. I think it's solely an animal rights movement. My reasoning for that is there's a million ways to abuse and exploit animals that don't harm the environment. Do you agree with me that veganism has nothing to do with the environment, or do you think, due to what Watson said in his founding of the Vegan Society, do you think that the environment is part of veganism?
No, I don't think the environment is part of veganism. They just said that it would benefit the environment, that veganism would benefit that veganism would benefit the environment, but they didn't say that that the environment was part of the vegan movement, or was the focus of the vegan movement.
Now, here's a question that I'd be interested to hear your response to. Now, we can talk all day about what the intentions were of the founders of the Vegan Society, what they said, what year they wrote X, what year they did this. The point is, why should we care? Like, why should we care what Donald Watson said or what Leslie Cross said or whoever? Why shouldn't we just focus on doing something, making veganism the most logical that it can be, make the most sense that it can? Why is it so important that we say, oh, well, actually, Leslie Cross said this here, and oh, actually, Donald Watson said this here? Why should we care about that?
Yeah, just imagine that you create a movement, that George Martin creates just some kind of Martinism or something like Georgism, whatever. And you set the parameters, that you set the guidelines for the movement.
Yeah.
And then other people come along, and they start changing the whole thing. But they start using the term of the word Georgism or Martinism to push other stuff different from what you created. I think that's one of the reasons that we should just focus or be true to what those guys wrote at that time.
I
But
see
also,
what you're saying there. Go on, finish.
Yeah, but also it's to me what I think of it. They spent 7 years thinking about this stuff because they already knew what was coming. Like they already they thought ahead, and they knew that maybe in 2023 there would be like a lot of
Oh,
people talking about crop deaths and all that
I
shit
don't know if they
that has.
foresaw the movement exactly for what it is today. I don't know, but carry on, carry on.
Yeah, but well, let's say that they maybe they found some of the critiques that we find today in the movement. Um, they found the same directed at them, like well, but to grow some plants, we have to kill some insects or whatever. I think that maybe that critique was directed to them at that time, and they said, well, yeah, it's unavoidable. What we oppose is not that we or what we are saying is not that we don't kill any animal at all, but that we oppose or reject um, animal exploitation, which is
But
a more
yeah,
general and more feasible, um, a more
so
feasible.
ultimately, yeah, but then David, was this whole practical and possible thing, was that then not originally just part of the vegan society intention anyway then?
No, not really, because yeah, it. Do you think that any human cause um, should rely on that clause or
Yeah, I know what
amendment?
you mean. It
You
would
know?
sound strange to say it as part of a human clause, but it is ultimately true. Like, I'm opposed to human slavery. I don't like, I would never own a slave. I would never buy like say we lived in a say I lived at the time of slavery in the UK and stuff. I wouldn't buy like the slave made goods, whatever. But ultimately,
Mhm.
there are parts in like my machinery and stuff that will be like that I can't really trace that have been made by like literal slaves somewhere. Like, so I can say I'm against slavery, but I'm living as far as is practicable and possible without slavery. But ultimately, I'm going to be living with it in some way or another. Do you see what I mean when it comes to humans? So am I
Yeah,
not being
yeah,
consistent there? I don't know.
yeah. But imagine that the human rights movement uh, had the same pushback. The same critique
Yeah.
from the public.
Hmm.
It would be like, okay, but you don't buy chocolate from Ivory Coast, but you buy computers and cell phones.
Yeah.
Where is the you know it would be it's ridiculous that we try to um, behave differently
Yeah.
from the human rights movement, and try to just cover all those gray areas. And
Hmm.
I think it just gives people just the idea that, okay, so we can try to debunk the vegan movement with this stuff. And
I
that's
see.
why every single debate that you see um, nowadays, uh, it's about those gray areas.
But then,
It's
David,
about the
yeah, how do you respond? Like, say I'm a carnist now, and I ask you,
Mhm.
and I say to you, crop deaths though, David, or I say to you, aha, you got on a bus today that had a leather seat. Like, how do you respond if I say that to you as a carnist?
Well, first of all, crop deaths are not caused by animal exploitation. We are just defending our food supply.
Hmm.
Just like it would be if some humans were threatening the food supply of another let's say there are two tribes
Yeah.
of people. If one tribe is threatening the food supply of the other, maybe war would be uh, the response of the tribe that is threatened by the other. So
Right.
It's the same with the with our food production, but we are not exploiting those animals. We are
Yeah.
just trying to survive, and we are 8 billion people, so we need some of these methods to feed the population. But it's not about it's outside the realm of veganism. It's
Mhm.
veganism
Yeah.
never set out to be the harmless, a harmless movement or a harmless group
And
of
then what about
people
the one
that.
about you using products that have animals in them like every day, which we ultimately do? Even this conversation now, there might be something in our device that has like an animal product in, or you might have used public transport today and use leather seats or whatever. Like, so how do you respond to that one?
Well, if people could live in societies without these devices and thrive and stuff, well, they should, you know, teach us how to do it, because
Mhm.
we normally, if we want to live in civilization, we need at least a cell phone. It's a necessity for most people, unless you want to live under a bridge. And even those guys that are homeless, they have some electronic devices. Most of
Yeah.
them, anyways.
Now we're
So
coming towards the end of the podcast now. So can I get you to define really clearly for the listeners what veganism is? Tell people like who might be misguided about what veganism is. Tell them very clearly what exactly it is and what they should not be listening to.
mhm. So veganism is the principle, the ethical principle against all animal use and exploitation. So,
Mhm.
and obviously, the practicable and possible bit is redundant. It's
Okay.
like any other cause. Any other cause goes as far as
Yeah.
practicable and possible.
Would I be right, David, in thinking you're quite a well-read person on animal rights? And if so, do you have any like books or something you could recommend the listeners to this podcast?
Mm, Tom Regan's A Case for Animal Rights, and
Sure.
Francione has some good uh, books, and maybe the Rain Without Thunder. Rain
Rain
Without
Without
Thunder, is it?
Thunder. Who's that? Who's Rain Without Thunder by? Is that
Yeah, Francione, Gary Francione.
okay?
Uh,
So Francione,
and
Rain Without Thunder, and Tom Regan's Case for Animal Rights. Those would be two books that you recommend.
yeah, and I would recommend maybe people are just too lazy nowadays. I would I would recommend that they follow their maybe some blogs and some uh, stuff that I would recommend people that just to stay away or be very wary of the utilitarian views inside the movement, because they are not veganism at all. They are just being welfarist. They are just uh, pushing for other stuff.
Yeah.
If you see an animal rights uh, activist talking about reduction of suffering, be very wary of whatever they say, because it's really not about animal rights.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
some choice words at the end there from David. Well, David, it was good to have you on the show, and I think it's you
Thank
always
you.
offer interesting perspectives, and I consider you someone who's very well versed in that kind of stuff and the history of the vegan society. So I want to thank you so much for coming onto the show, and I think the audience would have found that a very interesting listen.
Thank you very much, George. It was a pleasure for me to be here, and thank you for the platform. And I hope somebody gets something out of it.